to destroy, what they try to damage, is not just that particular midah of Shmir Sinayim, of Shovavim. It's much larger. When it's under attack in the Gullus of the Eiruv Rav, the final Gullus, what's really under attack is being alive with Yiddishkeit. And Bechlal, being alive. A person that's physically alive, but really spiritually and emotionally and mentally being alive versus being dead, that's really the Nekudah of attack. And again, as we've been talking about for the past bunch of weeks, that there are certain midas that the Rebbeinu Shalom created us with that are the markers of life and are the koiches nefesh that really define a person from moving from just physically being alive and being active to truly being expressing one's existence, one's life, and investing and imbuing chiyus into one's actions and into one's activities. And so those midas, that's what we've been talking about. And all the ones, if you remember from the chart, the ones in the middle. So Keser, Das, Tiferes, Yisoid, those are the midas that we went through so far. And now we're up to the final one, the midah of Malchus. The final one of the midas that are in the middle, that center beam, that center line in describing the koiches nefesh. Now, as we've seen with all the other ones, again from Keser all the way down to today, each one of these qualities, each one of these midas find a very important role in Purim. Because again, as I mentioned, Purim, which is a yontif to celebrate the life of the Jewish people, are overcoming death. So it's obviously going to be related on a spiritual level to all the koiches nefesh that are also sort of overcoming the decree of Haman and becoming more activated in a positive way to bring us spiritually to a state of life. And so as we talked about that, every that we went through, we saw how it's very much connected with the Inyan of Purim. Now, Malchus, again, without even defining what the midah of Malchus is in terms of us and how it's related to being alive spiritually, but Malchus, obviously the word Malchus means kingship, and that's certainly a major theme in Purim. I mean, you have to go too far. I mean, right away, the whole Megillah is talking about the king Achashverosh, the Malchus of Achashverosh, and ultimately, when Mordechai is, again, victorious over Haman, it's not just Haman's plot is thwarted and he's killed, but Mordechai is established as the Mishnah Melech, as a second in charge, level of Malchus. He's paraded through the streets with a crown of Malchus on his head and royal clothing with a royal horse. Tilbash Esther Malchus, it's all very strong theme of Malchus. So we have to understand, so Malchus is not just obviously there's kingdoms, there's kingship in the world, but there's a midah that's called Malchus within the nefesh, within the person, and that, on the list of midas, it's the final one. It's the final one, Bechlal, and certainly in the middle row, it's the final one. And being the final one, certainly in a certain sense makes it the most down to earth, the most simple, the most practical. But in a certain sense, it's also the most fundamental. It's also the most fundamental. So, for example, when we started this whole discussion of these essential midas, we learned together a piece in the Leshem to sort of give us a general atmosphere that one has to be in to allow these midas to be cultivated and developed, and that's the midah of mesinas, of patience. Right? Life takes time to develop. It can't just happen overnight. It doesn't happen so quickly. It takes time. And so that was sort of the first backdrop. Malchus also, it's not the same quality as patience, but Malchus also has a certain. It's not just seen as like a midah, at a particular midah. It's an atmosphere that a person has to be in to allow all the other midas to cultivate and to develop. So Malchus also, as we're going to learn it today, it's not just a midah. It's sort of just a mindset, a certain mindset to be in, within which Keser can be activated, and Das, and Tiferes, and Yisoid. It's a backdrop. Malchuscha. Malchus kol olam, the pasuk says that Hashem, your Malchus, the midah of Malchus, is the Malchus within which all universes are able to exist. It's a certain frame of reference, and from that perspective of Malchus, then everything is able to be cultivated, and life is able to. It's sort of the Malchus is like the petri dish of life in a certain sense. Like everything is able to come to life in Yiddishkeit when it's coming from this backdrop and this lens and this perspective and the atmosphere of the midah of Malchus. So what is the midah of Malchus in terms of the nefesh? And why is it so important? Why is it so important? So it's like this, on a very, very simple level, there's an old saying, it's hard to know exactly where it comes from, but there's an old saying by our people, Ein melech b'lo am. There's no such thing as a king without a multitude of people, right? If you're alone on a desert island, that's not a kingdom. You're just by yourself. Even with your family, you're not a king over your family. No person shouldn't live like that or think that. Why? Because the definition of a king, who is obviously a position of leadership and authority, but that authority that's called a king is that authority has to be over people that are not him, that are not just simple extensions of him, like his own physical family. Rather, it's over diverse, different, multifaceted, complicated, contradictory personalities. And this king is somehow able to come and be an authority figure over all of that. Ein melech b'lo am. You need an am. You need a multitude. A multitude doesn't just mean numbers. It means differences. It means things that are different, people that are different. And then you could have a melech uniting all of that. Which means that the nature, the quality of malchus is to be able to pull back and to live with a perspective of the big picture. Because that's what a melech does. You have let's say, you have a bunch of, you have a million people. And they're all individual people, their own deis, their own personalities. Everyone is a little universe. And then all of a sudden the king comes, and the king unites all of them together. And then each one is their own little thing. What's your name? Yankel Goldstein. What's your name? Shimon Levine, whatever, But at the same time, with all of our differences, we are also united under the same malchus. And a malchus means to be able to see yourself beyond the little bubble of your physical life in your little universe. It forces you to think bigger, to be bigger. That's what a kingdom is. A kingdom is uniting all these little cities, all these little provinces and so on under one larger umbrella. In a spiritual sense, therefore, the midah of malchus is a quality and a certain ability to be able to not get lost in the details, but to be able to see all those details as part of a bigger picture, to be able to have a bigger perspective. And this is really one of the most important qualities that a person has to have in order to cultivate a pneumistic Yiddishkeit, a pneumistic life experience, and to be able to infuse, like we were talking about last week with the site and so on, to infuse depth and soul into one's activities, into one's life, which is the definition of life, is to be able to make sure that you don't get completely lost in the details and the weeds. To be able to think in klal, to think in general, to think in broad terms, while obviously, as we'll talk about this, not neglecting the details, but being able to have one foot out of the details, be able to think bigger. That's a perspective within which pnimius and depth and inwardness and soulfulness is able to be cultivated. And so everything we've been talking about, the goal of the Eiruv Rav is really the question of, are you going to be able, the guy's doing a mitzvah anyway, is the mitzvah dead or is the mitzvah alive? And the difference between life and death is, okay, well, the body is there, the physical mitzvah is there. Is there a soul to the mitzvah? Is there depth? Is there inwardness? Is the person emotionally invested and spiritually invested? Is the mitzvah three-dimensional? Well, one of the greatest qualities that one has to cultivate that and to allow the neshama to breathe and to develop is a sense of klal, a sense of malchus, of being able to pull back and see this mitzvah as part of a much bigger mosaic of a person's life and a person's avodas Hashem. Even on the most simplest of levels. I mean, when you get mamish like tunnel vision to this mitzvah, then all you're doing is this mitzvah. But the most simple, most basic, necessary thought in order to breathe neshama into this mitzvah is to remember why you're doing this, right? And who commanded you to do this. So already those thoughts require an ability to sort of pull back and to be able to see the bigger picture of Yiddishkeit, the bigger picture of your life. And that's a very, very important quality to cultivate a pneumistic perspective. Okay, that's what the midah of malchus is. That's what I'm saying. So it's hard to say that it's a particular midah. It's a mindset. It's a certain koyach within which neshama is able to be cultivated on all levels. I mean, this is true for mitzvahs. It's true for everything. We know this, that the more stuck a person gets into pratim, into small things, the less simcha a person has, right? Because as we spoke about with the midah of Keser and Das, remember that simcha is also a simon of life, right? The more lively a person is in terms of their activities in the world, automatically that's simcha, right? Simcha and life go together, right? The Jewish people survive Haman, and here Shushan, everyone's happy, right? So happiness equals life. And so we see this, that when to be besimcha, it requires very often to be able to see not just this moment in front of you, but to see it as part of a much bigger picture of your life and not to get caught in the weeds. It's a very important midah to have. Now let's go through it and we'll see where this will take us. So if you take a look at Maramukah number 1, this is a piece from Aras HaKodesh. Now Rav Kook, in this piece in Aras HaKodesh, in the first volume, page Mem Aleph, he's not talking about, he doesn't identify this as like Malchus, but he's talking about this quality of being able to be connected to Klal. But he says it in his own amazing way, so we'll see how he says it. He says like this: "Tchunasa shel histaklos haruchanis," the nature, the predisposition that a person has to have in order to see things from a more spiritual perspective. Hiskiras hakol biyachad, to see things from a spiritual perspective and to allow neshama to be cultivated and to be developed. It comes from a more all-inclusive perspective. The nature of details is not going to be spiritual. The nature of spirituality is more all-inclusive. So if one wants to be able to have, so the nature of spiritual vision is having vision that's more large, that's more klal, that's more zoomed out. That's what he says. Hard to touch it. Tchunasa shel histaklos haruchanis, the tchuna. Tchuna is like the quality, the trait. The trait of spiritual vision. Hiskiras hakol biyachad is seeing everything all together. That's what he says. V'zoisi tiva hamiyuchad, and this is the nature that's unique to spiritual vision. Hamavdila mistaklos sichlis pshuta, which makes it separate and different than the vision of just simple human intellect, which is not spiritual. So physical vision, even intellectual vision, but not ruchnius, is going to be more shiasuka tamid b'pratim yichadim, which is much more involved in details. So human intellect, human seichel, the vision of human seichel it sees details, whereas the vision of the neshama, the vision of spirituality, sees klal. That with very great effort and hard work, the human seichel is able to take details and put it all together. So, whereas ruchnius, the soul's vision, sees things as klal, and from there, as we'll see, the pratim then fit in. But the beginning, the perspective of neshama is more klal, whereas the perspective of earth is more prat. And he says as follows. Yes, that's one of the major differences exactly between nevuah and like Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shebal Peh, 100%. So Torah Shebechsav, it's the classic example is, you have one pasuk of Taitafos Beinei Necha, and all of a sudden all of Hilchos Tefillin is somehow contained in that. So there's a certain, like when Moshe Rabbeinu was revealing the mitzvah, he was revealing it from the perspective of neshama, the perspective of klal, and so the pratim are not there, right? And Torah Shebal Peh comes and sees things from a more sichli perspective and sees pratim, and slowly but surely try to fit it all together to sort of get it back to that pasuk. But that's the difference in vision. Now he goes on to say, it's interesting. His balei haneshamas hamiyuchados with skiras pnimis. Those neshamas. Now Rav Kook says there are certain neshamas. Everyone has this midah of malchus, right, to a certain degree. But there are some neshamas that are much more predestined and sort of given a heavy dosage of this midah of malchus, and those neshamas have a very strong inclination to a more spiritual vision, this quality of being able to see things from a klal. And he says those bali neshamas hamichadas, the skiras pnimis, those neshamas which are given the miyuchad specifically this type of vision, this pnimistic vision, they're very connected to that type of vision, to the very core of who they are. It's not like a person that the root of his neshama is coming from this quality of malchus. That's a very important part of their personality, and it's not just like a nice thing everyone's like. It touches who they are in a very deep sense. You could feel that he's like it's autobiographical. This paragraph. And a great and deep pain they feel. Kishanol chotzim, when they are forced and lachatz, like they're pressured, where they're pressured to sort of go into details. Why would they be pressured like that? Sometimes the pressure comes from themselves just because of their own education or their own what they're accustomed, the way they're accustomed to thinking. If a guy grows up in an environment where everything is very detail oriented, they're not going to know any other option. But in the meantime, their neshama is much more klal oriented, and so now they're in a position where they're sort of pressured into thinking in a way that doesn't fit with how they're supposed to really think. Or let's say there's again the environment around them is compelling them to deal with details. And says Rav Kook, I'm not talking about just when I say details, I don't mean like physical things. I'm not, even in ruchnius, I'm not talking about, it's not a matter of physical or spiritual, but whatever the camp is, whether it's Torah and mitzvahs or whether it's physical things in parnas or in family, there's two ways to go about to be involved in any of these inyanim, klal or prat. And those neshamas that are klal oriented, they should know that the reason why they're klal oriented is because that is the type of vision that's necessary for a pneumius experience to develop. So those people that are klal oriented, also a klal oriented vision is a vision that allows pneumius to cultivate. And so those neshamas that are not allowed to think in that way or to cultivate that midah, they're going to go through a lot of inner turmoil. Ella, says Rav Kook, those neshamas though, shemiyashim es daitam, no, they console themselves, they're machazik themselves, they hakerim with the recognition. They realize that yes, it's true. My natural inclination is to think bigger and more klal, but at the end of the day, like in order to allow myself to have that bigger perspective, I need to get these details done. So they sort of like comfort themselves and with the thought of like, okay, Lamaisa, this is not my nature. My nature is not to get involved with this pratim, but I have no choice right now. And if I involve myself with these details, eventually that's going to allow me to be able to sit back and to experience the bigger picture. But right now I have no choice. That's how they, sort of deal with it. But they have to know that deep down, they're still upset. They're still upset, and they have a deep desire within them, l'katzer machshirim, to try to be makatzer, to try to shorten their involvement in the details, which in their mind is only the means towards the end. Yeah, and to bring a little bit early the light of tachlis, which to them is the bigger picture. But there are neshamas that are much more connected to prat, and their tchuna, their personality is not a vision that necessarily is predisposed to cultivate pneumius. And to them, when you sit back and start talking about klal, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And those are the people that need to be that are much more pratistic. Again, whether it be spiritual or physical, whatever the involvement is, it's all about pratim to them. And those people are more predisposed not to experience, not to even, I say the words even care, or not to feel anything missing without if a Yiddishkeit is not three-dimensional, it might not necessarily feel anything missing in that. But these are the different neshamas. Now the truth is, the tzaddikim have told us. This goes back to the Baal Shem Tov himself. The truth is, it's recorded by it was passed down from the Baal Shem, the Chemagid, the Baal Tanya, and the Chassidim of Baal Tanya. This is recorded that the Baal Shem Tov said that before Mashiach comes, the neshamas that are going to come to the world are going to be much more inclined to the midah of malchus. They'll be much more malchustic neshamas. Neshamas that are going to have a hard time pigeonholing themselves into one particular inyan. This is also true, by the way, in terms of something we do find nowadays, which is you could explain this phenomenon away in like social explanations, but there are obviously some people that still have a very strong Messiah in terms of their family minhagim and their family dynamic. I am a Belzer Chassid. My father was a Belzer Chassid. My grandfather, great grandfather, and that's all we know. That's our inyan. That's a good thing. But for the most part, most people now, you could blame World War II. You could definitely people that are Bali Tshuva experience this, but for the most part, even people that are Belzer Hasidim for Dairis nowadays very often like their kids don't feel Belzer Hasidim anymore. You know what I'm saying? And there's a certain sense of not being satisfied with just one particular color or one particular school. Now, that's coming from a very strong midah of Malchus, because this quality of Malchus is not that klal is not only true that the person is not satisfied with living in a way where all they see is literally what's in front of them, but it also can manifest in this way that they're not satisfied anymore with just the single note tradition that they've received from their parents, which, you know, in earlier generations where the midas, where it was less, the midah of Malchus was less dominant in terms of the neshama. So, okay, you were Belz and you were whatever, Sadmer, and you were Chabad, and you were Taimani, you know, and you were happy with what you were. You didn't need anything more. Nowadays, people need more, and so it becomes a challenge. But if a person is able to get the proper hadracha and to be able to be given and to learn how to navigate through, like, and to sort of come in contact with a Yiddishkeit that's more klal, that somehow is able to contain all these different colors. It takes time. It's hard. It's frustrating. But with time, if you get there, it's much more illuminating. And the Yiddishkeit that's more klal oriented is a much more for those that are malchustic, certainly is a much deeper Yiddishkeit. That's why, by the way, with Purim we find this, that the whole Yontiv of Purim in the Megillah story, for example, you could only appreciate it when you pull back. Right? That's the whole thing. Any particular point in the story, not super significant, and it was over, was it like 13 years, right? So in order to appreciate it, you have to pull back and read the whole thing at once and see the whole Indian is Malchus. The whole Indian is like that. You know, that's what's going on over here. And when everything begins to turn, and Esther Malka asks Achashverosh, you know, she goes into Achashverosh's chamber, whatever it is, and she makes her request, and the request is also like plotted out, right? Achashverosh says, "What do you want?" And so a non-Malchus perspective is, okay, so tell Achashverosh what you want. What you want is the Jewish people's survival. But Tilbash Esther Malchus. Esther Malka wears the royal clothing. She's connecting herself to the Malchus. And Malchus is this quality of klal, which also connects with patience, right? In order to pull back, it takes a little level of patience, right? Because if a person's impatient, then all they're going to see is what's in front of them, and they're not going to allow themselves the time that it takes to pull back and to cultivate. That's why, as we said in the beginning, that the midah of patience is also a huge backdrop within which neshama can be cultivated, and the midah of patience is connected with the midah of keser. The word keser in Tanakh, kater, also means to hold back, to be patient. This is why we find in the Surah Kedusha that keser and malchus are related to each other. I mean, even on a simple level, Malchus means kingship and Keser means the crown. The king wears the crown. So Keser and Malchus are related to each other, the top and the bottom. Because Keser means patience, and Malchus means bigger picture, bigger perspective. And they go with each other. It's hard to have a bigger perspective if a person is impatient. So Esther Malka, who's trying to bring the Jewish people back to life, to allow the neshama of the Jewish people to sort of re-enter the body, and to allow the Yiddishkeit that the Jewish people have, that they fell asleep, and sleep is the neshama leaving the body. It's a little bit of death. Esther Malka is trying to bring Purim into the world, which is about the Jewish people's return to life. And returning to life means being able to have an environment in which neshama is able to be cultivated, which requires klal, big picture. And in order to do that, it takes patience. So Esther Malka goes into Achashverosh wearing the royal clothing, Batilish Esther Malchus, and is offered the opportunity of, like, right away, tell me what you want. And she said, no, I'm playing long ball over here. You know, I'm playing three-dimensional chess. You know what I mean? So I'm not just playing checkers. And because of that, I'm going to allow things to cultivate and develop. We'll see where this goes. And that's what Esther Malka does. And that's not pushing off the salvation. That's allowing the salvation to be cultivated. That is the salvation. Malchus, klal, patience, keser, malchus. That's what's going on over here. And so that's what's going on. So those neshamas that are malchustic have to know that that's their nature. Not only, so now, okay, I mean, it's only 9:25 it seems, but I think it's 10:25, so we'll move on. So this quality, this yesod of being oriented towards klal, not only is that necessary, again, as we said, for those that have that midah, So then they have to be able to live like that and to appreciate that and to connect to other, to teachers, to malamdim, to mechanchim, to rabbeim that appreciate that midah of malchus. Because if you're a malchus guy, right, and your rebbe is a non-malchus person, you're not going to get along. You're going to get kicked out of class very quickly, right? So that's not the way it works. If you're a malchus, then it's much more beneficial to learn from a malchus to take a person. If you're a non-malchus person, then you learn from a non-malchus person. But it's shidduchim. That's the way it goes. So not only is it necessary, to find the proper shidduch, but we also find that this is also the idea of being able to pull back, of getting out of the weeds and returning to a much bigger place. In Ruchnius, there's a klal, there's a principle that the breeding ground for Yetzer Hara, the breeding ground for klipa, for dinim, for difficulties, is pratim. Mm-hmm. It's pratim. So pratim, when we talk about prat versus klal, individual, pieces versus bigger picture, it's not just a different orientation. Pratim is also the domain in which the Yetzer Hara has a very strong achiza. So what we find in the Sarmak Daishim is that a strategy within which to deal with the Yetzer Hara is, first of all, to recognize what territory it is able to be cultivated in. If a person is struggling with difficulties in life, with the Yetzer Haras and so on, it's important to know, well, first of all, you have to know your enemy. What environment allows the Yetzer Hara to be cultivated? The answer is pratim. The answer is pratim. If a person is able to move to the place of klal, the place of klal is much less susceptible to attack. It's much less susceptible to the Yetzer Hara getting into that place. And what therefore we find is that a major strategy when it comes to dealing with the Yetzer Hara, dealing with difficulties in life, is an Indian of being able to return to Malchus, of pulling back into that place of klal. Because that place of klal, first of all, gives you a little bit of a breather. We all know this. It's in the details. That's where a person gets angry and frustrated, and even on a very, very basic level. What does a person do in Avera? If a person knew the bigger picture of life and was conscious of the bigger picture, of course a person would never do anything wrong. Why does a person do anything wrong? So again, it could be because they don't know any better, but we're talking about someone that knows. It's only because they're losing sight of the bigger picture and they're completely focused on tunnel vision. Like, that after this activity, you're not gonna be happy with yourself. So why are you doing it? Because all I know is right now. So the whole nature of Yetzer Hara is in the world of pratim. But the more a person can be inclined, in a general sense in life, to be klal oriented, then the less they're enmeshed in that place of prat for the Yetzer Hara to even have a stronghold. Not only is that an escape from the domain of the Yetzer Hara, as we'll see, that gives you an advantage. It gives you higher ground. That from that place, I can then involve myself in details, but I have 1 foot out. And that gives me a certain strength. Take a look at Marmukah number 2. Also from Rav Kook in Oros HaKodesh, page Nun Beis. Hashayrish haruchani hachazak. The strong spiritual root, like the klal, the malchus, the big picture where all details are coming from. Hamoli rananos shel chayim u'metzias, which is full of the vigor of life and reality. It's in that klal, right? The klal, that's where neshama is cultivated. Hu shelech mimenu anofim v'anfei anofim lein tachlis. From there, that's where pratim should be emanating from. Like I was talking about on Shabbos morning, right? You could have all the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim and all the Yud Gimel Midas of the Torah being Nidreshes Behem, but it has to be flowing from Hashem. And the more it's flowing from Hashem, the more you won't make bad Kal V'chomers, like Shalom Melech, right? That's what we were talking about. Ula Pa'amim, and sometimes, says Rav Kook, Kishan Neshama Ayefa, Miriboy Hanafim, when the Neshama is exhausted from too much involvement in the branches, right? That it has no choice but to take a breather and to rejuvenate itself by returning to the root, right? The Mekayrai, the Koichem is Chadish, and its strength will become renewed. And guess what happens? When you return to the klal, when you connect to Hashem, then what? Not only are you now taking a break from the details, returning to the bigger picture of your life, on a very simple level, that's what vacation is supposed to be, right? Why is a person going on vacation? Right? The problem is you go on vacation, then you're dealing with the details of the vacation, right? It's a rachmanis. But the whole idea of going on a vacation is to be able to take a step back, from the pratim, to rejuvenate yourself by returning to the root of who you are. That's really what it is. Why is the root of who you are Miami? It's good kasha. That's that's the idea of a vacation, to return to your root, right? And then when you return to your root, you're reinvigorated. And now when you go back to the world of pratim, the pratim, you could actually not just handle them, but they could actually blossom, and you could actually be better at the details because you have been reconnected to the root. You have to remember, like, sometimes it's important when you have an organization, or you have a business, or just in life, like, to remind yourself of the mission statement, right? Because sometimes when you get so caught up in building the infrastructure, and you forget, like, why am I building? Like, what's the infrastructure for? Like, like this whole top. What's the meaning? What's the Hashem? That's the root of all these 13 principles. Like, so you have to remind yourself of that, and then the 13 principles will become even starker. So he says, "He shavacharkach." After taking time in the root, then you return. And you could interact and be involved in the branches in a new way. And the branches, well, then you could grow more branches, and they could blossom with flowers and fruit. It's gewaldig. Which before, without returning to the root for a little bit, you didn't have the kaiches. Forget to deal with the branches, for certainly not to cultivate them to produce flowers and fruits. You were getting lost in it. And this is the idea. And this is the idea why connecting oneself to Pnimis HaTorah is the foundation, is the root that actually is mechazek your involvement in Abai and Rava. In other words, he's referring to this idea that you have Nigla and you have Nister. And very often, this is a classic, it's a Bacharish type of Indian in yeshiva to think about this. If I spend more time in Machshava and Pnimius, it's going to take away from my time in Gemara. I mean, yes, obviously, time-wise, you only have so much time in the day. But to think, it's like a person planting a tree and says, I don't want to deal with actually making sure the roots are healthy. My tachlis is the branches. Yes, the tachlis is the branches. That's what you want to produce. I understand. But the healthier the roots are, the more the branches will produce. So the root in Torah is pnimius. It's Torah of Shimon. That's where it's all coming from. The stronger, the healthier the roots, then automatically the healthier the Abai and Rav is going to be. It's like the famous Mash, I think Rechai Volozhin maybe or something. There was one of the Maskilim, that he was very somehow he had a relationship with Rechai or something, and he came to Rechai one day with like a big kasha that he had in Diktuk, because that was like a big, they were very into Diktuk. And so he comes to Rechaim with like a big kasha and diktuk, and Rechaim is learning whatever he's doing, and he asks the question. Rechaim like mamish just gives him a 2-word answer. It's like it blows his mind, right? So he says, I don't understand this. I'm a brilliant guy, he says, and my whole life I'm involved in diktuk. And you don't learn diktuk, let's be honest. And so all of a sudden you have the answer to like, how's it possible? So he said the famous Moshe. He said, let's say you go to the grocery store, right? And you go to the store and you see a guy in the store and he's buying apples, and it's 10 cents an apple, right? And he takes 10 apples, puts it in a plastic bag, right? And you're following him to the cashier. 10 cents in apples, 10 apples. He gives $1, and he buys the 10 apples. And think to yourself, 1 second, those 10 apples, 10 cents, but there's a plastic bag. So evidently the bags are free. So you go and you start taking the whole roll off the thing and walking out of the store. They tell you, excuse me, what are you doing? He said, no, the bags are free because the guy paid $1 for 10 apples, and the bag is free. So obviously the bags are free. So they say, shaita. When you buy the apples, the bag comes free. But if you want the bags are actually more expensive than the apples. It's the same thing over here. Diktuk is a gewaldige thing, but it's bags compared to the Pnimis HaTorah that Rechaim is involved in. Yeah, when you buy the apples, the bag comes free. But if you want to just buy bags, it's going to be more expensive. It's the same thing over here. Like the more Pnimistic a Yiddishkeit is, then of course we all know this. Then Shabbos is better and Kashrus is better, and just everything. The branches of life blossom. That's just the way it is. If the roots are healthier, that's the mitzias. Not only is this true in terms of pulling back, even when it comes to figuring out what Yetzer Hara is to work on, there's also this approach, which is even within Yetzer Haras, there are certain Yetzer Haras which are more the pratim, and certain Yetzer Haras which are more like the klal, the root that all these problems, that many of my problems come from. And that's also a strategy to be able to not get caught up in the branches, but get to the root. Marmukah number 3. This is from Likutei Moharan, and this is the piece in Likutei Moharan, Chelak Aleph Chav Tes, where he introduces the idea that I'm sure we've all heard of Tikkun Klali. Right? The Rabbi Nachman came up to be Masakin the Nyanim of Shmiras Bris. He was Megala 10 Kapitach Telem. He said he's 10 Kapitach Telem. It's a big tikkun for those things. But the backdrop of the idea of Tikkun Klali, he says like this: Ulasakin kol averes v'pratis. The person wants to fix all their averes, right? Hey, Rabbim Oid, it's a lot. The kaved al adam, and it's very heavy, such a burden. So you're going to mamish get involved with it, mamish going down to Yetzaraville, like mamish pratim, and that's where you're going to fix things. Hini haklal. The principle that a person has to have is shetzarach al masakin tchil Tikkun Klali. You fix the klal. Don't focus your attention on the pratim of how the Yitzhara, how it's expressing now and now. Pull back. Try to figure out where this is all coming from, and try to fix that on some level. The details will then take care of themselves. You're going to tell me, you're going to ask me, that seems to be a harder job. Or, like, I got so much bigger, like the branches seem to be much more damaging than the root. If the answer is, but the root is where it's coming from. So maybe this guy, maybe this guy's life is falling apart from all the branches in his life, and maybe the root is because he's lazy. And so he's thinking to himself, I have laziness, it's true, I have that midah, but then I got all these problems in my life. And those problems are much more serious than laziness. Yeah, but maybe the laziness that you have is the root of all these problems. So get to the root, fix the root, be masak in the klal. And in that place of the klal, the Yetzar is not as strong over there. It's obviously the root of the problem, but it's not as you're not as entangled in that place. It's not enemy territory as strong. So there's an Indian of focusing on the klal. Tzarech leila, so he says, nevertheless, even though it seems to be bigger in an avodah that's only like when I take care of everything else, then I'll get to that. He says no. Tzarech leila mitchila the madrega hayarso yanim is right away you go to the bigger madrega. This is true when it comes to the Yetzer Hara. This is a big klal. A big klal. And Marmukah number 4 again, we're just going to go through this quick because it's already getting late, but it's a similar idea. This is from a sefer of Phil Paritcher. It was a Talmud from the Altani, it's a Tzedek picker. And he says like this, he says, Derech Havodah D'Mikaidim. In earlier generations, when there was a less heavy dosage of Malchus in terms of the Neshama, Hayalilchem Imhara, the Avodah was deal with the branches. That was the avodah. Avoiding the skaf, the midas, overcoming the midas, facing the enemy head on in his territory. That was the way it was. Ach etzloi, but by the Baal Shem and the Baal Tanya, it was nischadish and in chadash. It's a new mahalach, a new approach, which is Tikkun Klali. This Indian of klal, of malchus, of reinvigorating the roots, and the branches will take care of themselves. Hainu sheyikshar es atzmai. To connect yourself to God Himself, and the other inyanim will take care of itself. So he says, and even though the guy is having, he knows all of his inyanim in the branches of his life, everything is messed up, and you're telling me, Balatanya, that I should have dvekus and espilus, and I should allow myself to have a good davening and to sing nigunim and to allow myself to learn deep in Yanim, even though I know the rest of my life is messed up, so it feels counterintuitive. But he says, it's a big high madrega, and it feels like a little bit like you're faking yourself. Dafka, those neshamas that are connected to the midah of Malchus, which is the lowest of the midas, those are the ones that need this approach the most, because that's what Malchus really is. They're not capable. That's not our inyan of dealing with the branches so much. The branches are very, very difficult. We're more inclined, again, those neshamas are more inclined to fight from higher ground. Right? And when a person, that's a malchustic person, even contemplates the approach, the other approach of dealing with the branches, the person just gets depressed right away because feels overwhelmed by it. Like Rav Kook said, right? Those neshamas that are more klal inclined, they feel a pressure and a discomfort by being involved in pratim. Alkein hoyatzas admor. Therefore, the eitzah of the Baal Tanya was loy lasik elarak ba'avodas hiskashas betzim elokos, to busy yourself primarily with connecting yourself with the essence of godliness, ba'omek hadas, with a real deep attachment. And all the branches will be removed on their own. V'zeh Yisoid Divrei Chasidus v'Yisoid Sefer Tanya. That's the fundamental approach of Chasidus B'chlal and Chabad and Sefer Tanya B'frat. That's what Chasidus. That's what the Baal Shem Tov is. That's the Inyan Malchus. That's why, by the way, it's not a coincidence that Chasidus reintroduced the world to Malchus, right? One of the big things that the Misnagdim had like a really hard time, even the Chassidim had a hard time with, is like the idea of a Rebbe. Not just a tzaddik, okay, tzaddik we've always had, but that he's like the melech, right? It's like a royalty, right? So, like, okay, I understand that you want to honor tzaddikim, but what does that have to do with the bigger picture of Chassidus? Well, the answer is, Chassidus is about reorienting the Jewish people and making us more comfortable with serving Hashem in that way of Malchus. So, of course, the tzaddikim of that movement are going to be Malchus oriented. That's just the nature. That's what Chassidus is about. So, of course, they're going to be bringing back Malchus. The Neshama Kolos, exactly. And so that's the idea. The more you connect to that tzaddik, the more also, and this is also related to the idea, again, this is a whole discussion by itself, but the idea of connecting oneself to a tzaddik is that the tzaddik is, in a certain sense, within people. So the masses are like the branches, and the tzaddik is like the root. So the idea, that's also why in Chassidus there's such a focus on connecting oneself to a tzaddik, because the tzaddik is sort of, relative to you, is like returning to that place of klal. And so by connecting to the tzaddik, within yourself, you're giving yourself more of the capability of finding that place of root, that place of klal. It's all revolving on this yesod. It's all coming from this idea, which is putting Midas Hamalchus as the focal point, and to sort of allow, again, this midah of patience and large perspective from that place to allow pnimis to be cultivated.
The concept of Malchus and the midah of Malchus seem almost counterintuitive. Malchus, we're going to say kal, ishech of levav, but yet Malchus is one shirish of it.
So there is one shirish, but that shirish, that's the difference. It's not one person, as amongst 5 million people. He's in charge. He's the root. From him that everything is unified in that person. That's what a melech is. Right. There's a certain pashtus in that. That's also why Rabbi Nachman and so on, part of Tikkun Klal is pashtus. The pashtus is not simple in terms of complicated things being moved to the side. Yeah. This is where all the complications are coming from. That's it's a very fundamental principle. This is why, again, Pnimis HaTorah, also the nature of Pnimis HaTorah is to see prat. It gets involved in details, but the pratim are coming from a much bigger place. The sugya that Pnimis HaTorah is dealing with is God. That's the sugya. And from that sugya, okay, now we figure out how to live. But the sugya is Hashem, and the is Rachman, and it comes from there.
Is it fair to use the terminology of godless with pratim?
Yes, exactly. Godless is going to be by its very nature more klal, and kadness is pratim 100%. That's it's in the Sarak Daishan by the Mekubalim, it's like synonymous. Kadness equals prat, and godless equals klal. It's the same meaning. Now, just to end off, this happens to be. It's just a beautiful piece. This is from a Sefer Kesem Oifir. It's from the Kamarna's Pirush, the Kamarna Rebbe, his Pirush on Megillah Esther. So it ties up what we've been talking about, and he fits it into the story. So we know that just very quickly, when Esther Malka, again I mentioned before, so Mordechai tells Esther, you have to go into Achashverosh, right? So Esther Malka says, I can't do that. I haven't been invited to the king, right, for 30 days, and he can't just go in. So Mordechai says, I don't know what to tell you. We have to do something. And so Esther says, fine, gather all the Yidden. They should fast for me for 3 days, and I'll go in. That's the story. So he says like this. He just, he introduces us to what was really going on. These were not simple people, Mordechai and Esther. These are not simple people. He says like this, Ki yedua. It's known, it's well known, it's that what? Shekol ha'oises v'hamaisim gedolim v'neroim. All the great wonders and miracles, right? Pile ploys, the Paldik, all the Chassidish stories. Sha'as Maran HaBaal Shem Tov La'enik Kol Chai. All the Maisim the Baal Shem Tov did, all Tzadikim, right? How do they do that stuff? Like, what's the trick? So he says, Ayidei Yichudim. It was all through very sophisticated divine names and Yichudim and spiritual inyanim. Shetikin hapagam shel zeh achaytei. So, Mashal, a guy comes to the Baal Shem. I have a problem with Parnasa. Whatever, Parnasa is not working out. The Baal Shem Tov makes a moifis, and the next day a wagon load of gold just shows up at the guy's door. Whatever the mice is, right? So how does that work? So what happens is the Baal Shem Tov sees this guy. The guy comes, and the Baal Shem Tov sees, okay, well, why doesn't he have parnas? There's some sort of everything comes from the higher world. There's some sort of blockage. There's something stopping parnasa to come to this guy's life. Why? Averis the guy did, Pagamim, who knows, this life, previous lives, who knows? There's some sort of problem. So what the Baal Shem Tov does, the tzaddikim, is that they're able to get to the root of the issue, and they're masaking it. Right? Whatever there's some issue with the branches of this guy's life. And so the Baal Shem Tov somehow, however tzaddikim do this, they fix it, without the guy realizing what's happening in his kishkas. The Baal Shem Tov fixes it, all of a sudden the Shefa comes. Yichudin, the Baal Shem Tov, whatever the magic, however he does such a thing. Okay, sheniskan zeh hapagam. I'm sorry, shetikin hapagam shezeh hachayte. So the Baal Shem Tov somehow fixes the damage that was done by the sin of this person. Shasal amal b'shchina, whatever damage this person did to the higher world because of his shortcomings. Ushkeniskan zeh hapagam. And when this damage is fixed, hemshich refu v'chaim. So automatically refu and life, everything comes to this person back. Okay. And it looks like the Baal Shem Tov did a maif. It's not a maif. It's his assistant to it. He fixed the problem in the neshama, and mela things come. But he says like this: but he said in order to do that, and Kamarna, he's speaking from experience. In order to do this, he says you need a certain shmira. Sometimes the damage is too great, or sometimes the prosecution against this person is too strong. It's not always, you don't always have the ability to go in and do that surgery and to fix it. Could be it's not an Yisratzin. More than that, he goes on to explain, I cut out some of the stuff, but he goes on to explain that when it's not a right time, if the tzaddik tries to push it, it could actually be incredibly more damaging. If a person is not strong enough for that surgery, it could be even more damaging than anything else, and the tzaddik himself could be damaged. There are stories like this from the Baal Shem, for example, that he said about himself that he put in a lot of effort to fix the neshama of Shav Tzvi, Yamal Shemai, and the Baal Shem Tov said that because of his efforts, he almost lost he was almost destroyed from it. So there is such a thing that a person has to find, but it's again, it's not for us, but it's a tzaddikim. They have to find an Eis Ratzin. It has to be the right time. That's how you'll find some stories that the guy goes to the tzaddik, and the tzaddik says, "Something I can do." Right? What do you mean? The guy before me had the same problem, and all of a sudden you turn the guy's life upside down. Well, me, you can't have no eitzah. Well, I'm a bigger Russian than the other guy. I don't know. The Neis Ratzin, there's certain tzaddikim can tell that right now I can't. There's nothing I can do right now. I don't find myself being able to be successful in those branches. I can't do it. And this is the conversation that's taking place between Mordechai and Esther. Again, Mordechai tells Esther Malka, go into the king. Understand, the king is not. It's not just Achashverosh. Yes, Esther Malka is physically walking into the chamber, but we understand we're talking about Nevi'im over here. These are not simple people. Mordechai was telling Esther Malka, Leilech bi'yichudim b'shemes hakdoshim l'sakin hapagam. Go and fix the pagam that is clearly going on in Ishmas Yisrael that's allowing Haman to come to the world. And again, Esther and Mordechai saw themselves as the tzaddikim and the tzaddikas of the generation, and they're trying to fix these inyanim. So they're going through the physical motions, but they're working on a different level as well. And again, I cut out a lot of stuff over here, but he goes on to explain in the Psukim how you see this and different Shemus HaKadoshim that are hinted to in the Megillah, the Kavanis that Esther Malka was being told by Mordechai to do, this Shiva. But what does Esther Malka say? She hasn't been invited to the king in 30 days. In other words, Shebekam Gadolu. This is a big problem. Whatever damage was in the neshama that was allowing Haman to come, it's a big problem. And it's very easily not be successful. That I'm going to be destroyed from such a thing, to put in such an effort. I can't. And sometimes mamish death itself could come to the tzaddik or the tzaddikas if they're involving themselves in tikkunim at a time where it's not an eis ratzon. And guess what? Mordechai agrees. Maskim. You know what? You're right. The eitzes that I'm giving you right now with the shemus hakdosh and so on, it's not an eitzah. Shein ha'eis goyrim. It's not the right time now. Lahalis bichudim hamshachas to fix things in this way of yichudim of shemus. It's not working. The branches are too. It's not a right time. So now what? But Mordechai then says to Esther, Afal pi. Even though you're right, sheyav shelasak and adei yichudim. You're right. The eitzah that we were thinking until now is not going to work. That we can't just sit back and do nothing. We have to figure out a different strategy, how to fix the problem. You got to figure some eitzah out in order to fix this issue. If the normal approach of just fixing the problem itself is not a solution right now. So what does Esther come up with? Gather all the Yidden together. I will put on the meat of Malchus, and with that I'll approach the king. What does that mean? Nosne Eitza Nechaina. So Esther Malka now introduces us to a new Eitza, which is similar to what we're talking about. Sheyesh Ayidei Lev Ayin V'Nishbar U'Bittel V'Ovev Einei Atzmai. There is such a midah where the Jewish people, where a person gets to the very root of who they are. And now the Gemara introduces us, you want to get to the klal, what's a very strong way to return to that place of klal? Interestingly enough, by absolute humility, by absolute hisbatlos, by humility, by seeing yourself as nothing, that's a doorway into that place of shirish. Because the branches, that's the place of something, right? The root, that's the place of nothing, right? And when I say nothing, when I say the word ayin can mean either like mamish, nothing, like there's nothing here, or ayin in terms of the primordial nothingness, you know what I'm saying? The nothingness that everything comes from. Like a little baby is ayin compared to the adult that this baby will Bez Hashem grow into. But everything that the adult is rooted in that nothingness of childhood, in that place of ayin. Mi ayin yavai ezri. So the Gemara is revealing to us, and Esther Malka is revealing the secret. If the place of shirish, vis-a-vis the place of details, is nothing, is the place of ayin, then a doorway into that place is to feel yourself as ayin. If you feel yourself as nothing and just complete his badlus and bittul and a sense of humbleness towards the world around you, towards other yidden, then that's you're cultivating within yourself a bechina, a place of ayin. And ayin is shirish. That's where shirish. Everything this world is yesh me ayin. This world is something from nothing. What does it mean nothing? Nothing doesn't mean nothing. Nothing means the root that all something comes from. We call that ayin because we can't discern any reality there. So it's nothing. But the way to connect to that ultimate place of ayin, of primordial nothingness, is by feeling nothing within yourself. And the more humble a person is, the more automatically you're klal oriented. And he says like this: when a person has that midah of a leiv nishba, of a broken heart, and so on, you could open up all gates of compassion without any obstacles. When you're trying to open up every gate, then you have to have those specific keys. But like he quotes the famous mashal from the Mitzvah Shemagid, but there is an eitz of what? Of just taking a sledgehammer and just breaking through all the doors. And the sledgehammer is what? It means to return to a place of ayin before there's locks. Right? It's like you get into a place before there's even a lock. And that place of ayin is opened up when a person feels ayin within themselves. And he says, K'may Ganef, she'en tzarech l'maftech. Ganef doesn't need a key. M'shaber kol minolim. He breaks open the doors. He picks the locks. That's the way it is. And that's what the Malka is telling Mordechai. There's no Eitzah right now. We don't have the keys. We don't have the keys to these doors. What's the Eitzah? You have to connect to a time and to a place that's above the locks. And the way to do that, in the most strongest way, is for Yidden to feel a sense of humility and humbleness and a sense of ayin, and that comes with achdus, right? If I'm something and you're something, we don't get along. The fact that Yidden could get together, Lech Knesses Kol Yudah, means that what he's telling Mordechai is we need to reinvigorate, and we need to bring up in the Jewish consciousness this sense of a leiv nishba, of a broken heart, a sense of humility, and with that there'll be achdus. And when there's that sense of humility and nothingness, then all of a sudden the level, the ayin that is the root of all things is also activated, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves by the root, and by the root we can reboot the whole system, and the minias will automatically go away. By feeling ayin down here, we're then activating the supernal, the primordial ayin that all things and problems come from. All gates of compassion are then open. So it's a murdik eitzah, and that's exactly what Mordechai was told by Esther Malka, and that's what Purim is. That's mamash Purim. So Purim is a day of like called Pushi Yad Noisim. Right? Everyone knows, right? Whatever you put out, whatever you ask for the Rebbeinu Shalom will give you. How does that work? Stam, free gifts. Wednesday, no. Thursday, yes. What's pshat? Pshat is because the avoid of Purim is what? Is absolute ayin and leiv nishba v'nitkeh shalchmanis v'tanaseh v'yainim ad lo yada. There's no das. There's no me. Everyone is a leiv nishba v'nitkeh. You have that. That's called ayin. Let's lech k'nesses kol yudim. You get to the place of ayin. So everything is there's no minhag, there's no locks, there's no doors, everything is open. It's you just jumped over Haman. You just mamish jumped over the whole thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be zeicha to, after all this involved in all the limudim of Eiruv Rav, should be zeicha to takasi the end of Golus on all levels, B'frat B'chlal, V'yeskal Tzedek Meher V'meinu.
Simplicity of market.